Spunky by Dori Brink. Last time in chapter 12, we found that a new dog joined the family, little Happy. Happy was half the size of Spunky and at first showed self-control, so they thought. But Happy is a very fun-loving little dog, very fast on his little short legs. And to join us, oh, hey, if you forgot what happened or you want to reread or re-listen to the story, go to Reading Corner with Mrs. G on YouTube and look for the previous chapters. We're going to start at chapter 13. But before we do, let me introduce you to the dogs here at home. This is Ranger. Say hi, Ranger. Okay, and this is his son, Royal. This is Royal. Say hi, Royal. Okay, so they came to join me for the reading of Spunky. Here we go, chapter 13. The high-pitched yapping was coming from the fields. I ran down the slope, following the urgent sound. Was Happy in trouble? When I came close, I saw what it was. A man on horseback was galloping across our fields. Happy was running alongside the horse's front legs, never losing pace for an instant, and yapping up at the rider. The man was shouting at Happy to get away. I decided to help out. I took up a position at the horse's hind legs, running apace and barking. The horse kicked at me several times, but missed. This only increased the fun. The rider yelled down at me. A fine spray of spittle accompanied his shouting. Suddenly, the horse reared up on its hind legs, and the man slid off its back to the ground. Happy and I ran over to him. We sniffed him up and down. His dazed face was wet with sweat, and steam seemed to be oozing out of him. That silly Happy began kissing the man's face. With a burst of energy, the man made a grab for Happy, but his hand only grasped a bunch of weeds. Happy was already behind him. This seemed to give the man a fresh surge of energy. He raised himself off the ground and came stumbling after us. Happy darted between his legs, underneath his outstretched arms, and right through his outstretched hands. At last, the exhausted man simply dropped his arms to his sides and shuffled over to his horse. With his last bit of strength, he lifted himself into the saddle, wiggled the reins, and eased the horse along without once glancing back at us. We let him go. It was almost dinner time anyway. The houses were coming closer. A new row of wooden skeletons was going up in our fields. During the day, the sound of hammering could be heard throughout our house. When the sun started to go down, the workmen stopped and left the skeletons standing there, empty and strangely quiet. The three of us ran together through the fields to inspect the new skeletons. We ran in and out of the wooden frames one by one, sniffing everything we found. In one of them, we found skeleton stairs that led up to a low-ceilinged room. We climbed the rough, unfinished planks one by one. Nothing upstairs but wood shavings and sawdust, with nails strewn around, just like everywhere else. We ran down again. When we reached the bottom, we realized that Happy was not with us. We looked around, then up the stairs. There he was at the very top, looking down at us with eyes blinking back fear. He was afraid to come down. That small head made the wide spaces between each stair seem even wider. It was easy to see he could fall between the spaces if he missed a landing. It was beginning to grow dark, and menacing shadows loomed everywhere. We were anxious to leave. Dodger and I ran up the stairs. Happy welcomed us eagerly and pranced around our legs. To show him there was nothing to it, we ran down the stairs again. When we looked back, Happy's little black head, with the white patch between the eyes, was still stiffly poised at the top step. No matter how much Dodger whimpered up at him, and no matter how invitingly we pranced about below, he would not come down. What could we do? For a long time, we circled around at the foot of the stairs, but it was so dark now, only the white patch could be seen above. Finally, Dodger lowered her head in resignation. We had to go home. With a nod of her head, she motioned for me to follow. We had to leave Happy behind. When we reached the house, Daphne was waiting for us. Dodger and I moved slowly toward her, guilt making us drag our tails between our legs. Dodger kept ducking her head as if to avoid a blow. "Where's Happy?" Daphne asked. It was like the crack of a whip. Dodger backed away as if struck. "Where's Happy?" Daphne repeated. Her voice seemed to shriek in our ears. I tossed my head in the direction of the houses. Daphne moved toward me. "Come on, show me." We had no choice. We had to show her how we had left Happy behind. Our tails hung low as we guiltily led her through the fields. As we got closer to the skeleton house, we could hear Happy's yapping, a pitiful, fearful sound. We led Daphne to the foot of the stairs and looked up. In the darkness, all we could see was the wet shine of his eyes and the white patch. Daphne cautiously climbed the stairs and took Happy into her arms. She brought him down carefully, step by step. He was covering her face with kisses. As soon as he was placed on the ground, he pranced around us with that silly grin on his face. For some reason, he was proud of himself. Daphne patted his head, which only added to his joy. Then she turned to us. "Thank you, Dodger, Spunk, for bringing me to Happy." The gentle tone of her voice seeped through us and took the guilt away. All of a sudden, we too felt proud. All the way home, Dodger and I trotted close to Daphne. Crazy Happy ran far ahead of us, then doubled back to rejoin us again and again. Chapter 14. Peter had made a crackling fire in the living room, and we were all huddled around the fireplace. The night was damp and chilly. Rainy days had come again. "I think I've finally found another good watchdog for us," Peter said. "There's a woman not far from here who breeds Weimaraners like Dodger. I called her today, and she has a fine male dog for us to look at." "I wonder if Dodger will allow a strange male dog in the house." "Happy's a male." "Yes, but he's just a pup, so small and harmless." "Well, I think we should give it a try." "Who knows?" said Daphne. "If Dodger likes him, maybe we'll have some little puppies running around." "Good, then it's settled. We'll go and see the woman on Sunday. Maybe we can kill two birds with one stone." "Don't talk about killing birds in front of Dodger," Daphne said in a low whisper. Peter smiled. "You think they understand everything we say, don't you?" "I have good reason to believe they do." Daphne looked at me when she said that. On Sunday, we drove to a house hidden by thick foliage and surrounded by huge trees. When we turned into the driveway, we could see large, squared-off, wire mesh enclosures behind the house. Each held one or two dogs who looked like Dodger. They all began running around and barking as we drove up. Happy and I were told to stay inside the car. Only Dodger was taken out. Daphne attached a leash to her collar and held her firmly against her side. A sturdy, quick-moving woman came out of the house. She shushed the dogs, then turned to Peter and Daphne. "How do you do?" Daphne said. They exchanged handshakes and smiles. Then Daphne pointed to Happy and me peering out of the car window. "That's the rest of the family," she said. The woman's eyes flickered over us and dismissed us the next instant. She turned her full attention to Dodger. Out of her pocket came a tape measure. With nimble fingers, she stretched the tape across Dodger's back, up along her flank, then across her chest. Wrist and fingers sped along as she bent her head in deep concentration. Dodger's tail was twitching, but I could see she was impressed by this woman. "Good stance," the woman declared, "although the hip spread is a little narrow. A little too small bone for a purebred Weimaraner." She lifted Dodger's upper lip with her thumb. "Good teeth. Do you have any papers on her?" "No, we don't." There was some hesitation in Daphne's voice. "All my dogs are top breed. I have the entire history of each and every one of them. Wait here a moment. I'll bring out the book on Eric." While they waited, Dodger pressed close to Daphne's side, shifting her legs uneasily. The woman came out with a huge book, and they all sat down together on a bench underneath a tree near the car. The woman held the book in her lap and turned the pages. "This is Eric's mother," the woman pointed to a picture. "His full name is Eric von Stromberger III." Peter was scratching his head. A tiny smile played at the corners of his mouth. The woman turned the pages and made comments about Eric's father, brothers, sisters, ancestors, and the medals he had won throughout the country, mostly for good behavior. Finally, she put the book aside and walked to one of the wire fences and clapped her hands. "Eric," she called, "come." Even from this distance, we could see that Eric was something special. He was bigger than Dodger and very handsome. He leaped through the grass with rippling grace, smiling pleasantly. The woman opened a little gate and led Eric over to where Dodger stood. Spine hair stiffly raised. Dodger's tail began to twitch nervously, and that wild look had come back into her eyes. Eric kept smiling and gingerly tried to nuzzle Dodger's head. She backed away fitfully, grunting her indignation. Eric shifted his stance. Playfully, he romped to one side and further away from Dodger. The hairs along Dodger's spine began to soften. "Let's put them inside the pen and see what happens," the woman said. Daphne led Dodger through the gate. Eric followed and the gate was closed behind them. Eric showed off his fine stride, running gracefully around the pen. Dodger stood very still, watching his every move. From time to time, Eric ran close to Dodger, but always passed by without touching her. Finally, he stopped in front of her and thrust his face forward. Their noses touched. Dodger's tail wagged, and Eric leaped about happily. "She likes him," the woman declared. "In that case," said Daphne, "we'll take him home with us." Eric was willingly led into the car and sat in front between Happy and Peter. Daphne, Dodger, and I sat in the back. Eric kept his head turned around to us all the way home, but he hardly glanced at me. His eyes were focused on Dodger. But Dodger had her head out the window and was snapping at cars that passed by. Eric made his first mistake the moment we arrived home. Without thinking, he went through the door of our house first. Dodger nipped him in the ear with a grunt, making him stagger back in shock. Then she lifted her head and went through the door ahead of him. Eric bowed meekly and trailed behind us. Outside on the terrace, however, he quickly recovered his pride and eagerness to show off. At Daphne's command, he would sit, stay, and come with unfailing ease. On top of that, he knew how to heel, something Daphne had never taught us. With resentful admiration, I watched him heel. When Daphne gave the command, Eric marched beside her up and down the terrace. When Daphne stopped walking, he sat down at her heels. Dodger was impressed and pawed the ground, eager for her turn. Eric stood by watching naturally as Daphne taught Dodger how to heel. She learned quickly and seemed to enjoy the whole thing. I was bored. I sat on top of the stone ledge with my head slightly turned toward the fields. But out of the corner of my eye, I watched the activity on the terrace. Now, Daphne was ordering Eric and Dodger to heel together on either side of her. I must admit, they did it beautifully. But dumb little Happy kept running around them until they both lost stride and nearly tripped. Daphne didn't bother to ask me to do anything. Not that I wanted to. It was also silly. Still, a feeling of being locked out crept over me. I lowered my chin on my paw and sulked. Why did I stay here with them? The three of them were making me sick. The amount of food Eric consumed was incredible. I had never seen such portions of raw meat in a bowl. He gulped it all down in rapid mouthfuls and then looked around for more. He sniffed Dodger's bowl while she was still eating, but she nipped him away quickly. He would have to learn that Dodger's leftovers were mine and mine only. Not even Happy got to lick Dodger's bowl until I was absolutely through with it. When Dodger had eaten, I walked over to her bowl to get my bits of meat. I looked at the bowl in amazement. There was nothing left. Dodger had forgotten to leave something for me. I felt more closed out than ever. Inside the den that night, I tried to fall asleep. It was impossible. All night long, I watched Eric trying to maneuver close to Dodger and be snarled back each time. But Happy was allowed to lie up against her whenever he chose. I had had enough. I decided to show the three of them how I felt. Just before dawn, I got out of my bed, walked to the middle of the den, and went right in the middle of the floor. That got their attention. 3 heads jerked up, eyes wide in horror. They scrambled to their feet and ran out through the screen flap, one by one. Dodger first, of course. I settled back into my bed and went to sleep, contented at last. When Daphne came into the room, her gasp woke me up, but I pretended to be asleep and buried my head in my cushion. "What's this?" she cried in disbelief. I raised my head, my eyes half closed. "Spunky, you did that!" How could she tell? "You bad dog!" She chased me out the door. I trotted down to the field just as Dodger, Happy, and Eric were returning to the house. They passed by with their heads lowered. Dodger glanced at me nervously for a moment, then looked away. I felt good. I could get away with anything, and I wanted them all to know it. When I returned to the house, it was all cleaned up, and Daphne had forgotten all about it. The 3 of them had forgotten all about it too, and all about me as well. They were once again absorbed in one another, just as before. Oops, sorry. That night, I did the same thing. Dodger moaned, and they all ran out before Daphne got up. This time, when she saw the puddle, she was angrier than the day before. She whacked my behind as I went through the screen flap. Now I really had her going. So, the next morning, I did it again. This time, Daphne flew into a rage. I had never seen her so angry. When I ran outside, she ran after me and hit me so hard, I squealed. When I passed by the side of the house, Dodger grunted her disapproval at me. I didn't even look at her. I kept right on walking. This time, I decided, I would not go back to the house. I went to the old lemon tree and sank down into the thick grass. I could see the house, but no one could see me. There was Dodger coming around the side of the house, making her inspection tour. Happy was right beside her. Eric strolled behind at the appropriate distance. When Happy dashed under Eric's feet, the big dog snapped impatiently. Dodger's head turned sharply, and a look of disapproval was directed at Eric. He bowed his head meekly in apology. Ha! Happy was like a fly that Eric couldn't shake off. I sank lower into the ground. Life seemed unbearable. The sun started to go down. Peter's car drove up, but still, I didn't move. The 3 of them greeted him. I watched and listened with a lump in my throat. Soon, barbecue smoke began rising up over the roof of the house. I could smell the delicious meat sizzling, but I remained where I was. I could hear the clinking of bowls and dishes on the terrace. I closed my eyes and wished I could close my ears and nose as well. "Where's Spunky?" I heard Peter ask. Then Daphne called my name. Her voice came closer. She was coming around the side of the house. She was looking for me. I did not move. Suddenly, she was standing right above me. "Spunky!" she exclaimed softly. She knelt down beside me. "Don't you want your dinner?" I did not look up, but kept my chin on the ground. Daphne stroked my head. "I'm sorry I hit you, Spunk." Her hand was as gentle as a breeze. "You know I love you more than anything in the world." Her voice chilled in her throat. Then she put her hand under my chin and raised my head. I looked into her eyes. There were tears in them. She kissed my nose. I wagged my tail and quickly got up. We trotted back to the house together. My appetite was quite good after all. Just a little bit more. Eric's control was wearing thin. Happy did not leave him alone for a moment. Sometimes, if Dodger was not looking, Eric snapped at Happy in anger, but Happy was as stubborn as a fly. One rainy Saturday afternoon, the 4 of us were in the den. For the first time, Eric had managed to lie down close to Dodger without being snapped away. Happy was jealously hovering over them, yapping at Eric shrilly. Eric raised his head and with a sudden movement, bit into Happy. My ears stood straight up. I thought Happy's head was bitten off. Dodger staggered to her feet, stiff with alarm. Her hind legs wobbled until she balanced herself. Happy was shrieking in pain. Blood oozed over his eyes and mouth. Daphne ran into the room. She looked frozen, her mouth open in horror. In another moment, Peter was there. Quickly, he lifted Happy into his arms and carried him out to the car. Daphne followed, and they drove away. The house became silent. A small pool of blood darkened the floor where Happy had stood. Dodger and I huddled close together and stared at it. Eric whined and moved toward us. A gurgling snarl burst out of Dodger's throat, and Eric staggered back as if shoved. He retreated to a far corner of the room, whimpering. Dodger's rage erupted in thundering snarls. She paced back and forth in front of Eric, shoulders hunched, nostrils flaring, her nose drawn back in thick, quivering folds. The room and everything in it trembled. Eric cringed and whimpered deep in his corner. But the attack did not come. Dodger's jaws finally grew slack, and her pacing stopped. She sank to the floor, shivering, and looked about the room. Her bewildered gaze rested on me for a long moment, appealing and helpless. I had to comfort her. When I sprawled down close beside her, she sighed deeply. She did not look at Eric again. It was as if he were no longer in the room. Tune in next time for Chapter 15.